Night had fallen with an eerie silence, so profound it seemed to hold something hidden. It wasn't the usual darkness, nor the common rest of cities. It was a living, unsettling silence, as if dawn itself were awaiting a message yet to be revealed. Many felt, for no apparent reason, a weight on their chest, a sharp intuition, a sensation difficult to explain. And then it happened. Thousands of people awoke at the same time, as if a silent voice had called their names within their souls. It wasn't a noise, it wasn't a dream, it wasn't a movement, it was a calling, a deep, gentle, direct call to the spirit. Their eyes opened with immediate clarity, as if something invisible had touched their hearts and wrenched them from sleep. The air had a faint, almost imperceptible glow, like tiny particles suspended where they shouldn't be. Those who awoke immediately felt they weren't alone. It wasn't a human presence. It wasn't physical. It was something more subtle, maternal, sad, and sacred. A woman turned on her bedroom lamp, but the light flickered 3 times, as if an invisible hand had passed in front of her. Glancing toward the door, she thought she saw a blue reflection that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. She didn't feel fear. She felt a deep urgency, as if someone were trying to tell her something. In another city, a young man who had abandoned his faith years before awoke with a start. His room was dark, but his spirit sensed a presence. When he looked in the mirror, he saw a soft glimmer pass behind him. He turned immediately, but there was no one there. Yet his soul knew he was not alone. Something or someone had entered in the early morning. In a small town, an old woman had a vision in her sleep. In her dream, she sat in an empty church, shrouded in shadows. From the ceiling descended a point of light that slowly grew until it formed a blue mantle and a face filled with sorrow. The Virgin's eyes shone with a reddish glow, as if each tear were a silent cry from heaven. Upon waking, the old woman wept without understanding why. But deep in her heart, she knew she had seen the truth. The same feeling was repeated in thousands of hearts. Something was stirring in the unseen. Something wanted to awaken the world. Something that the Virgin would not allow to go unnoticed. Lights began to flicker in various homes. There were no storms, no power outages. It was like a pulse, a strange, almost spiritual rhythm. Some people felt a sudden urge to kneel. Others hugged their children for no apparent reason. Still others simply stared into the darkness, wide-eyed, as if expecting something to descend from the sky. It was in that climate of silent tension that the second sign occurred. A warm breeze swept through the early morning hours, even in completely enclosed spaces. Curtains moved without wind. Candles flickered without any physical touch. Hearts raced as if listening to a language not of this world, and at that very moment, thousands felt at the same time a clear, distinct impression, impossible to ignore. November 18th will not be just any day. The sky was waking up. The world was being called, and Maria was closer than anyone imagined. Before continuing with what is about to be revealed and which will change the course of this entire warning, I need to ask you for something essential, something that is touching souls and moving this message to thousands of hearts. Write in the comments, "Virgin Mary, awaken me with your light before November 18th. It's not just a comment, it's a prayer. It is a spiritual act. And every time someone writes it, this message reaches another soul that needs to awaken. Because what happened tonight was just the beginning. Dawn crept along with an unsettling gentleness, as if time were tiptoeing, afraid to disturb what was about to be revealed. The feeling was universal among those who had awakened, an open consciousness, an inner state difficult to describe. There was no sleepiness, there was no weariness, there was something deeper, clearer, more real than any thought. That was when the first tangible change occurred. A subtle wave, invisible yet intensely perceptible, traveled through the night like a whisper from heaven. It made no sound, it moved no objects, it stirred no wind, but it touched souls with the gentleness of a mother's finger pressing on the center of the heart. That wave awakened those who were still spiritually asleep. The animals reacted before the humans. Dogs that were resting soundly sat up with their ears perked up. Cats fixed their gaze on empty corners with unnatural attention. Nightbirds spread their wings as if something invisible had crossed over them. That wave didn't provoke fear, but recognition. A silent call. A gentle announcement that read, "Pay attention." Messages began arriving simultaneously in different parts of the world. They did not know each other. They did not live in the same city. They did not share the same life. But they all asked the same question. Did you feel anything? Are you awake? What was that? In a coastal town, a fisherman preparing to set sail saw something that stopped him in his tracks. The horizon, still dark, seemed to pulse with an intermittent silver light. It wasn't a lighthouse, it wasn't a ship, it wasn't a reflection of anything. It was a light that expanded and contracted as if the sky itself were breathing. The fisherman felt his heart tighten in a way he had never felt before. In a hospital, a nurse walking down a silent corridor saw the light on the wall intensify for a second, as if a presence had crossed the passage. There was no one there, but the air grew warm. She placed her hand on her chest. It wasn't fear, it was a deep certainty. I am not alone. In a remote village, an old woman who always prayed before going to sleep opened her eyes for no reason. Through the window, she saw something impossible. A star moving so slowly that it seemed to observe, not advance. The light was white, soft, yet alive. The old woman felt a tremor in her hand, as if someone were gently holding it. She knew instantly that this was not of this world. The testimonies coincided. There was no coordination. There were no explanations, but they had all experienced the same thing, and many had dreamed of the same date, November 18th. Some saw the date written in light. Others heard a female voice sadly pronouncing it. Others saw a calendar lit up from above. Nothing was by chance. Nothing was imagination. Nothing was a coincidence. As these experiences multiplied, a new phenomenon began to manifest itself. The aroma. In different homes at the same time, a soft rose perfume filled the air without any physical source. It didn't come from bottles. It didn't come from flowers. It didn't come from open windows. It was a scent that descended like a silent blessing. Those familiar with Marian's signs felt a chill. That scent doesn't appear for no reason. That scent announces its presence. That scent precedes a message. And then, without anyone speaking it aloud, a thought arose in thousands of hearts at the same time. Prepare yourselves for what will happen on November 18th. It was not a human thought. It was a spiritual whisper, a maternal warning. The night was alive. The sky was moving. And Mary was approaching with a call that no awakened heart could ignore. Before we move on to the next sign, even clearer, even deeper, I need you to do something essential for your soul, and so that this message reaches those who urgently need it. Write in the comments, Virgin Mary, awaken me with your light before November 18th. Every comment expands the light. Every comment opens a path. Each comment awakens another soul. What comes in the next part will be even more powerful. The early morning hours remained shrouded in a silence that no longer felt natural. It was a full, charged silence, as if it held a message waiting for the precise moment to unfold. Those who had awakened since the first sign continued to feel their hearts racing. It wasn't anxiety, it wasn't fear. It was a profound awareness, a feeling that every fiber of their being was being summoned. The sky, although dark, seemed to have an inner glow. The night had life. And someone was approaching. It was in that tense and sacred atmosphere that the following occurred. A second awakening. not physical, not caused by any sound. It was an inner awakening. Thousands of people began to feel a gentle pressure on their chests, as if a warm hand were touching their hearts from within. It was so unexpected and so intimate that many stopped immediately. Even those who hadn't felt anything in the first wave began to experience that gentle force that invited them to look upward. In a silent hospital, a man keeping vigil over his mother felt a profound warmth fill the room. His mother didn't open her eyes, didn't speak, didn't move, but her breathing became lighter, as if a peace had descended upon her. The man had to lean against the wall because for a moment he felt he wasn't alone. In a small apartment, a young woman who hadn't prayed in months felt a tear roll down her cheek, devoid of any human emotion to justify it. She wasn't sad, she wasn't scared, but something inside her had broken, not to hurt her, but to awaken her. Her heart uttered a name before her mouth, Maria. In a modest house, a woman woke her son, who was crying silently. He hadn't had nightmares. He wasn't asking for comfort. He just kept repeating in a trembling voice, "Mom, the lady is sad." The mother asked him what he had seen, and the child replied with the divine simplicity that only children possess. "I didn't see her, but I felt her." The phrase was repeated in different forms in many places. They didn't see it, but they felt it. They didn't hear his voice, but they heard his presence. On a deserted street, a young man stepped onto his balcony without knowing why. When he looked up, something in the darkness seemed to move. It wasn't a figure. It wasn't a shadow. It was a different kind of density, as if an invisible veil were about to lift. Suddenly, he felt such a strong shudder that he had to clutch his chest. The air was different. It was as if he were breathing light. In a temple deserted by the hour, a lit candle began to lean in a fixed direction, even though there was no wind. The flame seemed to point to something, to follow something. The priest, who had felt the call before, fell to his knees without hesitation. He knew that this leaning was no accident. He knew he was being visited. As these experiences expanded like circles in water, a new phenomenon began to manifest within hearts. The name of Mary, not as a voluntary thought, not as a conscious prayer. It was as if the soul were pronouncing it on its own. Some murmured, "Mother," without realizing it. Others felt the urge to put their hand to their heart. Others simply started crying for no explanation. The presence was becoming stronger. The night seemed to contain a vibration, a pulse, a breath. And then, for the first time all night, something even deeper happened. Thousands of people heard the same phrase, "Not with your ears, with all my heart." A sweet yet firm phrase, a mother's warning. November 18th, wake up. The phrase was not a metaphor. It wasn't poetry. It was not symbolism. It was a direct warning, an urgent appeal, a call full of love, a call to those who were still spiritually asleep. Eyes opened wider. Souls trembled. The light in the sky pulsed once, as if it were affirming the phrase with its own breath. Heaven was speaking, and the earth was finally beginning to listen. Before we move on to the next moment, the clearest one yet, where the presence will become even more intense, I need you to do something that is activating this message in thousands of hearts. Write in the comments, "Virgin Mary, awaken me with your light," before November 18th. Each comment extends this call. Every comment awakens more souls. Each comment is a spark of light, and what followed would become even more evident. The early morning was no longer a simple transition between sleep and dawn. It was a living mantle, charged with a silent energy that seemed to envelop every corner of the world. The air had a weight that was not physical, but spiritual. Something was approaching, something that did not belong to the earth, but that was descending upon it in a way that no one could ignore. Those who remained awake from the first sign began to notice a subtle change. The darkness was no longer completely dark. A faint light, like a translucent veil held by unseen hands, began to spread across the sky. It illuminated no objects. It cast no shadows. It had no visible source. It was a living inner light, as if the firmament had been ignited from within. Those who looked up felt a chill that came not from the cold, but from the soul. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. It was the same feeling one experiences when a familiar presence enters a room without needing to utter a word. On a lonely mountain, an old man who had prayed faithfully for years felt an unexpected warmth on his cheek, as if someone had tenderly placed a hand upon his face. He closed his eyes. He didn't need to see anything. He knew that this caress was not human. In a city ablaze with lights, a woman experiencing an inner crisis tilted her head back, gazing at the sky. The light moved with an almost sacred slowness, gently expanding and contracting. She felt her heart tremble. A phrase she hadn't thought of in years welled up from within. "Mother, don't abandon me." In a nearly empty temple, the flame of a candle began to tilt toward a fixed point, even though there was no draft. The priest, who had sensed the first flicker, approached silently. The flame seemed to be bowing and revering something unseen. He immediately fell to his knees. The presence was undeniable. As the light increased, something even stranger began to happen. The shadows changed. In that dim light, people's shadows seemed to lengthen or shrink for no reason. In some cases, a second, soft, diffuse outline appeared behind each body, as if someone was silently accompanying them. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't darkness. It was company. Many closed their eyes, but the feeling did not disappear. It was as if a maternal presence stood behind every awakened soul, protecting, holding, calling. While this was happening, a new impression began to form in thousands of hearts. Maria was trying to speak, not with audible words, not with a visible appearance, but with a language of the soul, deeper than any voice. Those who were standing began to feel the urge to put their hand to their heart. Others knelt without having planned it. Others simply began to cry. And then, for the first time since the night had begun to stir, something touched the earth in a spiritual way. A pulse. A gentle press, then a second one, then a third one, each one more intense than the last. In the third one, thousands felt as if the name Maria had been spoken within them, not by them. A sweet, firm, irresistible vibration. And along with that name came a silent phrase, perceived simultaneously by hundreds, perhaps thousands. "Don't be asleep on November 18th. The phrase pierced hearts without asking permission. It wasn't threatening, it was maternal. It was urgent. She was loving. The light of the sky breathed once more. A gentle breath, a sigh from the firmament. The message was clear. Something was beginning that no one could stop. Their hearts began to beat in unison. Tears appeared, as if a deep emotion had been awakened. And the light spread a little further, as if the sky itself were bending down towards the earth. Before we move on to the signs to come, even clearer, profoundly direct, I need you to do something essential, something that is activating souls around the world. Write in the comments, "Virgin Mary, awaken me with your light before November 18th. Each comment carries this message to another heart. Each comment is a small torch in the night. Each comment paves the way for revelation. What comes next will be even more powerful. The clarity that hung over the early morning began to slowly transform. It wasn't a sudden change or a flash. It was something much deeper, as if the light were acquiring intention. The air seemed heavy with a message yet to be spoken. A formless anticipation permeated the atmosphere, inviting every awakened heart to listen. Those who had been keeping a watchful eye since the first sign began to notice a disturbing detail. The night, although silent, seemed to breathe. There was no wind. There was no movement, but there was a constant feeling, as if a gentle presence were inhaling and exhaling within the sky. In a small house, A woman approached the window without knowing why. Something was calling to her. As she placed her hands on the frame, she felt a slight tremor, not physical but internal. Her eyes filled with tears, not tears of sadness. An indescribable tenderness enveloped her. It was as if someone had embraced her from within. In a rural area, a father went out to check on his animals. The silence was so profound that he could hear the beating of his own heart. Suddenly, the flashlight he was holding trembled slightly, not from a malfunction, but as if an invisible energy were brushing against it. At that moment, he felt a warm presence behind him. He wasn't afraid. He felt peace, a peace so deep that his tears began to flow freely. In an apartment, a man who had closed his heart to faith years ago experienced something he couldn't explain. An intense warmth spread through his chest, pushing out an ancient sadness he had long kept hidden. Unable to stop himself, he murmured a word he hadn't uttered since childhood, Maria. And while these events were silently repeating themselves in different places, the sky began to emit something new, a spiritual pulse. It wasn't sound, it wasn't light, it was a rhythm. A heartbeat that few could describe, but all would feel deeply. That pulse expanded like ripples on a still lake, crossing homes, temples, solitary rooms and hospitals. And with each beat, an emotion surged within hearts, a call to remember something forgotten, a call to return, a call to awaken. The pulse intensified with a second wave, and then with a third one. And in the third one, something happened that left thousands breathless. An inner tear sprang forth in unison in the hearts of those who were awake. It wasn't human crying. It didn't stem from personal emotions. He was a little older. A gentle maternal sadness descended upon humanity like an invisible breeze. But that sadness didn't come alone. It came accompanied by love. In a small temple, the image of the Virgin seemed to reflect the faint light of the sky in an unusual way. It didn't shine with physical light. It shone with something deeper, as if its silence were laden with words yet to be heard. In a humble house, a child woke up and looked at his mother with eyes full of a certainty that no adult could have. With a trembling voice, she said, "Mom, the lady is crying." The mother, surprised, asked her what she had seen. The child responded with the purity that only children possess. "I didn't see her, but I feel her here." And he touched his heart. Elsewhere in the world, a hospitalized woman felt an intense scent of roses fill her room. There were no flowers, no perfumes, no open windows. But the aroma was so real that it made the woman close her eyes. When she opened them, she felt as if an invisible hand had touched her shoulder. A phrase emerged within her, clear as air, "I'm with you." The testimonies were repeated, varying in form, but identical in essence. Maria was crying, but it wasn't a cry of despair. It was a cry of warning. A mother's cry that said something without needing words. A truth began to emerge in the early morning. Humanity was feeling the Virgin's tear. And then, when the emotion was so dense that it seemed to fill the air, the sky emitted another pulse. Stronger. To put it more clearly, more direct. At that moment, thousands heard a silent phrase within themselves. "Get ready. November 18th is coming." The phrase did not produce fear. It produced certainty. It created a sense of urgency. It produced a deep need to open the eyes of the soul. Before we move on to the visions to come, clearer, more intense, more explicit, I need you to do something that is awakening souls all over the world. Write in the comments, "Virgin Mary, awaken me with your light before November 18th. Every comment helps this message reach those who need it most. Each comment is an act of light in the middle of the night. And the next part will reveal why tonight's tear was not human. The early morning, which had previously been merely a silent shroud, had now transformed into a stage brimming with presence. A sacred stillness enveloped the entire atmosphere, as if the sky had halted its own movement to allow a message to be written in the air without the need for words. The faint light that shone upon the darkness remained suspended, but now it seemed denser, more alive, closer. Those who had stayed awake since the first signs began to feel an emotion that was not human. It was a sweet weight, a profound tenderness, as if something sacred were descending upon each heart. And then what no one had anticipated happened. An invisible tear fell upon humanity. It wasn't a physical drop. It wasn't humidity. It was such an intense spiritual emotion that it manifested within each person as a lump in their throat, pressure behind the eyes, a gentle tremor in the chest. Miles started crying without knowing why. It wasn't my own sadness. It was not human pain. It was a shared, maternal, sacred cry. The feeling permeated humble homes, modern apartments, silent temples, hospitals, and deserted streets. Everywhere, the emotion had the same essence. The Virgin was crying. But she wasn't crying out of despair. Not even in defeat, not even out of fear. She cried for love. She was crying as a warning. She cried because she saw what many were unwilling to see. In a small enclosed church, an image of the Virgin Mary seemed to reflect the light with a brilliance more intense than the rest of the altar. There wasn't enough light to cause such a phenomenon, and yet the image seemed alive. A profound silence filled the nave, as if every stone in the place bowed before a presence that descended with majesty. In a simple house, a child woke up abruptly and called for his mother. His eyes were filled with tears. He wasn't scared. He was moved. "Mom, the lady is sad." The mother, bewildered, asked what she had seen, and the child replied with the purity that only innocent souls possess. "I didn't see her, but I heard her here," and he pointed to his heart. In a hospital, a woman who had lost her faith years before felt a soft scent of roses fill the room. The smell was so real, so sweet, and so unexpected that her breath caught in her throat. She closed her eyes and felt a spiritual hand rest on her shoulder. A phrase arose within her, clear as if spoken to her very soul. "I'm with you." As these signs multiplied, the sky emitted a new pulse. It wasn't light, it wasn't sound. It was a feeling that permeated everything, a feeling that said, "Wake up. There's still time." The clarity of the sky seemed to expand slightly, as if the early morning were opening to let down something that could not be seen, but could be felt. And then something deeper happened, an inner vision. Thousands experienced it at the same time, without knowing each other, without being in the same country, without sharing the same life. The same image formed within the awakened souls. A blue blanket spreading over the night, a cloak that covered the darkness, a mantle that enveloped the world, a cloak that vibrated with a gentle pain but full of love. It was not a physical apparition. It was a vision of the spirit, clara, clear, impossible to deny. And beneath that cloak, everyone felt the same phrase resonate with an unmistakable force. "I am protecting them, but they must wake up." The phrase was not meant as a reproach. He came urgently, with tenderness, with pain, and with a loving warning that left no room for doubt. The air seemed to stop for a moment. Their hearts beat in sync. Some people fell to their knees without having planned it. Others simply cried. Others remained motionless, feeling a maternal presence envelop their entire lives. And then, as a final seal on that part of the message, came a silent phrase that resonated with thousands of souls at the same time. November 18th will be a day that marks a turning point. It didn't say what would happen. It didn't say how. It didn't say where. But the certainty was absolute. Before we move on to what's next, which will be stronger, deeper, and more revealing, I ask you for something that is awakening souls around the world. Write in the comments, "Virgin Mary, awaken me with your light before November 18th. Every comment helps another soul awaken. Every comment expands the light. Every comment paves the way. What follows in the next part will make the presence even clearer. The early morning was beginning to transform into an increasingly spiritual scene. The air, once still, now seemed to have an invisible movement, as if a breeze without physical origin were brushing against hearts without touching skin. The clarity suspended above the sky continued to expand, acquiring the quality of a visual whisper, something that could not be described with human words. All those who remained awake from the first signs began to feel the same thing. The presence was no longer arriving. The presence was here, not in physical form, not in a visible form, but in a spiritual closeness so profound that even without seeing it, it made the soul tremble. It was then that thousands of people began to experience the same inner vision, united as if it came from a single source, a blue blanket slowly descending upon the earth. It wasn't just any color, it was a blue that vibrated like the light of moving water, a blue that wasn't seen, but felt. A blue that seemed to have a life of its own, as if each thread were woven with ancient prayers, with tears turned into pearls, with whispers that only the sky could keep. That mantle did not descend from one point in the sky, but from everywhere at once. It was as if it surrounded the entire planet, enveloping it with an immense, irresistible maternal tenderness. Those who perceived it fell to their knees without understanding why. Others clung to the chest, others simply cried. And deep within that cloak, still without a figure, without a face yet revealed, there was a presence that vibrated with the intensity of the purest love. Maria was descending, but his descent was not physical, but spiritual. She wasn't looking to be seen through people's eyes. She sought to be recognized by her soul. In a small village, an elderly woman saw the cloak in her inner vision and felt such a profound peace envelop her that her breathing became light. She felt that her entire life, her sorrows, her memories, her losses, had been touched by a love that demanded no explanation. In a brightly lit city, a young man walking alone down the street suddenly felt the world grow quieter, as if all sounds were absorbed by a spiritual shroud. His heart pounded, it stopped, and without knowing why, he began to weep with a cry that wasn't his own. It was a sweet, blessed cry, one that purified more than it hurt. In a hospital, a nurse tending to a dying patient felt a veil envelop the room like a soft, invisible cloud, filling the air with a sacred warmth. She gripped the patient's hand tightly, and for a moment felt as if someone else were holding her own. Such profound tenderness washed over her that her eyes immediately welled up with tears. The cloak continued to descend, light, immense, impossible to measure. And as it covered every corner of the night, one impression emerged clearly in thousands of hearts. I didn't come to punish. I came to awaken. The tears multiplied. Hearts raced. The air was filled with an indescribable emotion. And then, a new sign shook the early morning. The clarity of the sky, that soft, living inner light, began to pulse to the rhythm of a heartbeat. A pulse, then another one, then another, deeper one, as if the sky had inhaled the sadness of the world and was returning it, transformed into love. With each pulse, a clearer image formed in the collective consciousness, a faint silhouette, a soft outline, a figure that was drawn within the cloak. It was not yet the face, it was not yet the voice, but it was the closest presence that humanity had felt in decades. And along with that spiritual silhouette, a phrase clearly formed in thousands of souls. There's still time, but not much. The phrase carried weight. I was in a hurry. It was true. November 18th was no longer just a date. It was a pointed spot in the sky. A point that marked the difference between those who woke up and those who remained asleep. Before moving on to what comes next, much more revealing, much more direct, much closer to the voice of Mary, I need you to do something that opens spiritual doors and helps this message reach those who need it most. Write in the comments, Virgin Mary, awaken me with your light before November 18th. Every comment lights a lamp. Each lamp illuminates another soul, and Mary sees each one of them. What comes next will mark the most intense moment so far. The early morning had reached a point where it no longer felt like dawn. It was something else. It was a threshold, a boundary between the visible and the invisible, between earth and sky, between the human and the eternal. The blue cloak that thousands had seen inside did not disappear. On the contrary, it began to gain density, as if every forgotten prayer, every sincere tear, every sigh of faith were weaving new threads into that cloak. Threads that vibrated with a soft glow, almost imperceptible, yet as deep as the ocean. And then, for the first time since it all began, the presence took another step. The silhouette, which was previously just an outline, began to take shape. Not a complete figure, not a visible face, but rather the unmistakable sensation of a feminine, soft, luminous form, emerging from within the cloak, as if from the heart of a maternal light. Humanity held its breath, even without knowing why. In the humble room, a woman who had felt the call from the first sign brought both hands to her face. His soul began to tremble. It wasn't fear, it was reverence, it was recognition, it was the certainty that something sacred was passing through his life. In a rural area, a man who had prayed for a miracle for his family felt the ground beneath his feet grow lighter. It was as if the earth were yielding space to the descending presence. The mantle, though invisible to the eye, seemed to brush against the fields, filling the air with a spiritual warmth that no sun could produce. In a large city, a young woman walking on the balcony felt a sudden change in the atmosphere. The wind stopped. The noise disappeared, the night became absolute, and within that stillness, something began to move in the sky. It wasn't light, it was not a shadow, it was like an extended heartbeat, a pulse that opened up in all directions. That pulse had only one purpose: wake up. It was then that thousands of people simultaneously had the same inner vision, a pair of hands extending from the cloak, female hands, delicate hands, hands that did not threaten but invited, hands that did not demand but rather supported, hands that seemed to want to touch the world without hurting it, hands that trembled with compassion. People began to feel a gentle warmth on their skin, as if those invisible hands had brushed against their faces. For many, that spiritual touch melted years of hardship. For others, it opened up an old memory of faith. For others, it simply unleashed a cry they had never been able to express. And while all that was happening, a silent voice began to form within their hearts. It wasn't a sound. There was no physical vibration. It was like a thought that didn't belong to the one who was feeling it, like a phrase planted in the soul, soft but firm. I didn't come to scare you. I came to call you. Tears began to fall on thousands of faces. The emotion was so intense that many had to sit down or rest their hands on something. The air was heavy. The shadows were soft. The inner light of the sky pulsed like a heart that did not want to stop. The presence continued to draw closer, and then something happened that marked this early morning forever. Thousands of people began to hear a second message within their soul, as clear as if it had been whispered in their ear, but without any sound. There is still time, but time is running out. The phrase permeated everything. She shed tears. He overcame fears. It pierced hardened hearts. He went through the entire night. November 18th was no longer a mysterious date. It was a luminous warning. A point in time marked by the sky, a day that the Virgin pointed out with urgency, tenderness, and pain. Their hearts understood that something was about to be revealed more directly, that the presence would not remain just in sensations, that the voice would not remain silent, that the cloak was preparing the moment when she would speak. Before moving on to the next part, where the manifestation will be even clearer, closer, more moving, I need you to continue awakening souls with this spiritual act. Write in the comments, Virgin Mary, awaken me with your light before November 18th. Every comment opens a door. Each door lets in a ray of light, and Maria is looking at each one. What comes in the next part will be one of the most powerful moments of this warning. The blue cloak descending upon humanity continued to take shape. The feminine silhouette that emerged within him seemed to take another step towards the heart of the world. The presence was no longer a distant sensation, nor a soft whisper in the spirit. It was a real, palpable, living closeness. All those who were awake, whether by calling, intuition, or grace, began to feel that something greater was about to manifest. The early morning had a spiritual weight that made thoughts stop. Their hearts beat more slowly, as if trying to hear a message that would not reach their ears. That's when something happened that no one was prepared to feel. The presence breathed, not a physical breath, no wind, no air movement. It was a spiritual breath that traveled the world like a silent wave capable of touching the most hidden soul. In a hospital room, a doctor dropped his pen when he felt that spiritual breath cross his body. In a temple, an elderly woman held onto a bench to avoid falling to her knees. In an abandoned house, a young man who thought no one could see him felt an embrace that was not of this world. And then, at that exact moment, a soundless voice began to form inside thousands of hearts. It didn't have a doorbell, it had no volume, I had no language, but everyone understood exactly what he was saying. It was Maria. Even without uttering human words, his message was as clear as if it had been written in light. The first sentence came like a loving whisper that pierced the darkness. I'm here. That I am here was not a phrase. It was a presence enveloping the spirit. It was a hug without arms. It was a mother's hand holding weary hearts. The second sentence came with more force, like an urgent call. Children, don't go on asleep. Those who heard it deep within their souls felt something gently break inside them. A shell, a resistance, an old sadness, a spiritual distance that had kept them subdued for years. The presence continued to approach. Her cloak vibrated gently as if it had a life of its own. And then a third sentence arrived with more pain, but also with more love. On November 18th, the sky will touch the earth. Humanity held its spiritual breath. It was the first time the date had been stated with such clarity. It was no longer just a hunch. It was no longer a number repeated in dreams. It was a direct maternal warning. At that moment, many began to cry uncontrollably. Others felt their bodies shudder. Others began to pray as they hadn't done for decades. And as thousands of souls awoke, an incredible phenomenon began to manifest itself in different parts of the world. The dim light of the sky began to take on a pinkish hue, as if reflecting a tear fallen from above. It was not a physical phenomenon. It was spiritual. It was a reflection of the Virgin's pain. In a village, a mother saw how the sky seemed to throb like a wounded heart. In a large city, the horizon trembled with a soft glow that made the most distracted raise their heads. In a remote field, an old man fell to his knees without understanding why, but feeling that he was witnessing something that would never happen again. The fourth sentence then arrived, full of tenderness and urgency. I can still protect them, but I need them to wake up. The message was clear. It wasn't a punishment. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't fear. It was desperate love. Love that pleads. Love that wants to save. Their hearts began to repeat the name of Maria without having planned it. The hands rose instinctively. The spiritual atmosphere of the night changed completely, and as the mantle continued to spread over the earth, preparing for what would happen at the climax of this revelation, one last phrase came like a spark ignited in the soul. On November 18th, I'll be closer than ever. The whole world felt the weight of that promise. A sweet weight, a holy weight, a weight that foreshadowed something even bigger. Before moving on to part 10, where everything will be revealed with full force and where Maria's presence will be clearer than ever, do one last thing to awaken other souls. Write in the comments, Virgin Mary, awaken me with your light before November 18th. Each comment opens another door, each door lets light through, and each light helps Maria draw closer. Dawn had reached a point of no return. The silence, the dim light, the cloak, the pulses. Everything had been a prelude, a path carefully prepared so that humanity could sustain what was about to descend. The sky wasn't hinting. The sky was announcing it. The awakened souls felt that something was approaching, with such a holy weight that it could not be described with human words. It was as if every breath in the world was being accompanied by another breath, one that came from above, one that did not belong to the earth. And then, without warning, without transition, without sound, Mary's presence was revealed, not as a physical figure, not as a material body, but rather as a spiritual form so intense, so pure, so luminous, that those who perceived it felt their soul tremble like a candle before a storm of light. It was her, it was the mother, the one who had cried, the one who had called, the one who had warned, the one that was now descending. The blue cloak opened like a sacred dawn. The silhouette became clear as a heartbeat. Love became almost unbearable. Thousands in different parts of the world began to cry with a cry that did not belong to the body, but to the spirit. It was a cry of recognition, a cry of return, a cry of, now I understand. The presence advanced one step further, not towards the earth, but towards hearts. They all felt the same. She did not come to condemn. I didn't come to terrify. I didn't come to destroy. He came to wake up. And then, the inner voice spoke for the last time, not with sound, not with vibration, but with an absolute clarity that no human being could mistake. The first sentence fell upon the world like a divine caress. Children, I came because you called me with your pain and with your silence. Miles put his hand to his chest. Others fell to their knees. Others closed their eyes so as not to miss the moment. She continued, I didn't cry because I was being punished. I cried because I loved them. A shudder ran through the early morning like a living wave. It was impossible not to feel it. It was impossible to ignore her. The voice continued to descend, sweet but firm. November 18th will be a significant day. Do not fear, do not flee, but awaken. The spiritual weight of that phrase permeated everything. Bodies, houses, cities, mountains. It was a warning. It was a call. It was a preparation. And then, the final sentence arrived with the force of an eternal promise. On that day, heaven will touch earth, and you will feel my presence like never before. The light of the cloak pulsed one last time, like a holy heart marking the end of an eternal message. The silhouette shone, soft, maternal, pure. And slowly, like someone withdrawing without abandoning, the presence began to rise back into the mystery. It didn't disappear, he didn't leave, it did not become extinct. He stayed. But in the invisible, deep inside, in private, in the soul of those who were awake, the early morning hours returned to their silence. The clarity began to fade, and the world breathed again, different, marked, ignited. But something had changed forever. Maria had spoken, and those who listened would never be the same again. November 18th was no longer a date on the calendar. It was a spiritual point, a date, a promise, a crossroads between earth and sky. Before this message is completely closed, before the echo of this revelation fades with the passing hours, I ask you one last time, as a spiritual act that opens paths, ignites souls, and awakens consciences. Write in the comments, Virgin Mary, awaken me with your light before November 18th. Your comment is not a text, it's a lit candle, a sign to the sky, a response to the call. and Mary will see it.